Hey friends, I'm Megan, so glad you're here. We've got a great episode today. Let's get started.
The moment he first suggested that she move with him was deceptively simple in its delivery. Yet it carried a weight so profound that it altered the contours of her entire world. She remembered the quiet tension in the room, the subtle shift in the rhythm of their shared space as he spoke, revealing not only the depth of his desire to maintain their connection but also the seriousness of the opportunity that lay before them. It was more than a request. It was an invitation to redefine their lives together, to step into an unknown future filled with both promise and risk. In the hours and days that followed, she found herself wandering through familiar spaces with a new attentiveness, noticing the textures of their home, the lingering traces of shared routines, and the small intimacies that had once gone unnoticed. Every glance at the objects around her, the coffee mugs lined in neat order, the worn edges of bookshelves they had arranged together, the faint echo of laughter in corners of the apartment, served as a reminder of both stability and the fragility inherent in the life they had built. Her mind oscillated between exhilaration at the thought of shared adventure and apprehension at the idea of uprooting her career and the life she had carefully cultivated. She traced potential scenarios in her imagination. Mornings waking in an unfamiliar city, navigating streets filled with unknown rhythms and sounds, negotiating cultural differences and logistical challenges, and yet doing so side by side with someone whose presence had always been a source of grounding and excitement. The possibilities stretched before her, expansive and daunting, and she felt the subtle tremors of fear as she confronted the reality that the choice she faced would have lasting consequences. She examined her own desires with meticulous care, asking herself what it was that she truly wanted. Was it the comfort of stability, the familiar cadence of daily routines, or the bold exhilaration of shared discovery and growth? Each answer revealed additional layers of complexity, and she recognized that the decision was not a matter of simple preference but an intricate negotiation between ambition, security, and relational commitment. The days were punctuated by reflection, a constant dialogue between her heart and her mind, as she weighed the emotional cost of staying against the practical and personal cost of moving. She considered the sacrifices implicit in leaving her established life, the network of colleagues and friends she had invested in, the career opportunities she might forsake, and the daily comforts that had become integral to her sense of identity and purpose. At the same time, she could not ignore the potential richness of the alternative life, the transformative experiences, the deepened intimacy, and the collective growth that might emerge from embracing the unknown. In quiet moments, she observed him, noticing the hope and vulnerability that accompanied his request, the subtle cues in his expression that betrayed both anticipation and fear of rejection. And she felt a profound empathy for the courage it took to present such a pivotal choice. She understood that this was not simply about relocation or logistics. It was about the alignment of life trajectories, the intersection of personal aspiration and relational desire, and the delicate balance between self-fulfillment and shared experience. The tension in her chest was tangible, an almost physical manifestation of the stakes involved, and she recognized the internal struggle as both necessary and instructive. She began to map the possible outcomes with exacting care, imagining the moments of joy and frustration, the exhilaration and exhaustion, the growth and compromise that would accompany any path she chose. Each scenario was vivid, painted in the colors of possibility and shadowed by uncertainty, and she realized that the decision was less about predicting outcomes than about understanding values, priorities, and the capacity to live with the consequences of choice. As she moved through her days, the familiar routines took on new textures, charged with meaning and potential, and she noticed the subtleties of her own emotional responses, The pang of fear when imagining leaving everything she knew. The thrill of anticipation when envisioning shared adventure. And the oscillation between longing and caution that mark each reflection. She explored the interplay of independence and partnership, recognizing that her sense of self was intertwined with her decisions, yet inseparable from the relational bonds she had cultivated. The act of imagining life in a new city illuminated the spectrum of emotions involved. Exhilaration tempered by anxiety, excitement shadowed by hesitation, and desire interlaced with practical considerations. She observed how her patterns of thought and feeling were influenced not only by immediate circumstances but by the cumulative weight of past experiences, personal ambitions, and the subtle pressures of societal expectation. In her contemplation, she considered the nature of love as both grounding and expansive, the way it demands flexibility, courage, and the willingness to embrace uncertainty, and how the delicate negotiation of individual and collective aspirations shapes the trajectory of connection. She recognized the profound importance of timing, of readiness, and of the alignment between personal growth and shared opportunity, understanding that the same choice could be liberating or constraining depending on context, intention, and execution. Each reflection deepened her understanding of herself, revealing the intersections of ambition, attachment, fear, and desire that guided her decision-making, and highlighting the intricate architecture of choice in human life. She traced the emotional resonance of the request across her mind, observing how anticipation, empathy, and apprehension intertwined, shaping both perception and potential action. Her internal landscape became a theater in which possibilities, consequences, and emotions danced, each influencing the other, each contributing to the eventual decision she would make. She contemplated the subtle tension between rational evaluation and emotional truth, between the call of practical security and the lure of relational fulfillment, recognizing that the act of choosing inherently carries both liberation and loss. As the days progressed, she found herself increasingly aware of the delicate interdependence of love, ambition, and circumstance, and of the way in which choices, once made, reverberate through time, reshaping identity, connection, and the possibilities of future experience. The chapter closes with the recognition that this moment, seemingly simple in appearance, was a fulcrum upon which the balance of her life and their shared potential teetered, and that the careful examination of heart, mind, and circumstance was both the burden and the gift of conscious decision-making in the terrain of love, opportunity, and personal growth. The days following her decision were filled with an uneasy tension, a quiet turbulence that she carried through every moment of her life, often unnoticed by the casual observer but acutely present within her own consciousness. She moved through familiar spaces with heightened awareness. Every corner of her apartment, every object on her desk, every subtle routine she had long taken for granted now appearing as a marker of the life she had chosen to preserve rather than transform. The act of choosing her career over moving with him was not a single moment in time but a continuum, unfolding with reverberations that affected her emotions, her perception of him, and the texture of their relationship. She found herself revisiting the conversations that had led to the choice, analyzing her own reasoning, examining each nuance of his tone, each glance, each hesitancy, trying to decipher the unspoken expectations that had guided both of them. Her mind oscillated between relief and apprehension, pride and doubt, confidence and fear, creating an inner dialogue that was rich in complexity and often exhausting in its persistence. She considered the practical implications that had influenced her choice, the stability of her career trajectory, the financial security she had built, the professional networks she had cultivated, and the daily routines that anchored her identity. Each consideration seemed rational, yet she felt an undercurrent of guilt and longing for the alternative life she had set aside. A life of shared discovery, adventure, and intimacy that existed now only in hypothetical landscapes she constructed in her mind. She reflected on the delicate balance between personal ambition and relational investment, recognizing that these forces often pull in opposing directions and that the reconciliation of their demands requires insight, empathy, and courage. The emotional consequences of her choice manifested in subtle ways, shaping her interactions with him, coloring her perception of shared memories, and influencing the cadence of their conversations. She noticed the small signs of distance forming, hesitations, the pauses in replies, the subdued tone of familiar exchanges, and understood that these were not merely circumstantial but the natural evolution of two lives, diverging along different trajectories. The process of long-distance negotiation began almost imperceptibly, a series of adjustments and recalibrations that required both of them to navigate absence, expectation, and desire without losing the threads of connection entirely. She examined her own coping mechanisms, rationalization, distraction, the careful compartmentalization of ambition and longing, and the subtle reshaping of her daily life to accommodate the new reality of separation. In this context, she recognized the interplay of autonomy and relational dependency, the way in which the assertion of individual priorities inevitably affects shared life, and the responsibility inherent in choosing oneself while maintaining care for another. Her imagination became a powerful tool, projecting scenarios in which she had moved with him, exploring the emotional and logistical contours of such a life, and contrasting these imagined experiences with the one she now inhabited. Each scenario illuminated the costs and benefits of her decision, highlighting the tension between comfort and growth, security and intimacy, independence and connection. She observed how memory and anticipation intertwined, shaping both longing and regret. The memories of ordinary days spent together, the morning coffee shared over quiet conversation, the walks through familiar streets, the unremarkable yet intimate routines of domestic life, now carried a heightened poignancy, their emotional resonance amplified by the knowledge of what had been deferred or forfeited. At the same time, the act of imagining what might have been brought both solace and pain, a bittersweet recognition of potentiality that coexisted with the reality of choice. She analyzed her emotional responses, noting the subtle oscillations between pride in her professional autonomy and sorrow for relational compromise, between exhilaration at career advancement and longing for companionship. Each reflection deepened her understanding of the complex interplay of human motivation, revealing the delicate architecture of decision-making in matters of the heart and life trajectory. The experience illuminated the consequences of prioritization, showing how choices reverberate across time, altering not only immediate circumstances but also perception, expectation, and the subtle threads of intimacy. She explored the notion of opportunity cost with increasing clarity, recognizing that every path taken inevitably shadows paths left unexplored, and that this shadow carries both lessons and regrets that shape identity and relational understanding. As she engaged in this reflective process, she became attuned to the nuances of long-distance relational dynamics, the importance of intentional communication, the delicate negotiation of emotional needs across physical distance, and the necessity of empathy, patience, and resilience in preserving connection. She observed the impact of absence on perception, noting how longing can magnify both virtues and flaws, and how emotional proximity does not always equate to physical presence. Her self-awareness deepened as she tracked her own patterns of thought and feeling, noting how her judgments, anticipations, and emotional investments shaped her experience of both self and other. She considered the broader dimensions of relational ethics, understanding that love, commitment, and desire operate within complex matrices of timing, circumstance, and individual priorities, and that honoring both autonomy and connection requires ongoing attention and reflection. Each day offered a subtle rehearsal of reconciliation and acceptance, a careful calibration of expectation, desire, and emotional labor that demanded awareness and intentionality. She recognized that the act of choosing career over relational proximity was not a failure but a complex negotiation of competing values, and that the path forward required integration of understanding, patience, and the cultivation of resilience. Her reflections extended into the contemplation of time, change, and the mutable nature of relationships, showing how growth and distance are intertwined, and how adaptation is necessary to navigate the evolving landscape of life and love. In observing the subtle shifts in both herself and him, she discerned patterns of behavior, emotional responses, and communication that revealed the fragility and adaptability of connection, and how the ongoing engagement with choice and consequence shapes both experience and understanding. The chapter closed with the awareness that decisions, once enacted, radiate outward, influencing identity, relational dynamics, and the emotional tenor of future possibilities, and that the careful cultivation of insight, empathy, and self-awareness is essential in navigating the tension between personal ambition and the enduring desire for connection. The early weeks of separation introduced a subtle yet undeniable shift in the emotional landscape of her life, a landscape that had once been shared in effortless harmony but now existed in parallel streams of experience. Each morning brought with it the quiet awareness of distance, a physical and psychological gap that stretched between cities, shaping the rhythm of her days and the texture of her reflections. She moved through her routines with a heightened attentiveness, noting the absence of his presence in spaces that had once been filled with small gestures of companionship, the quiet rhythms of shared life that now echoed only in memory. The hum of her apartment, the familiar arrangement of furniture, the morning light filtering through windows that had witnessed countless shared moments, all carried the weight of what had been postponed or relinquished, reminding her of the consequences embedded in the choice she had made. Communication became a carefully measured endeavor, punctuated by pauses that signaled both the limitations of technology and the subtle erosion of immediacy that accompanies distance. Each message exchanged was imbued with layered meaning, affection interwoven with restraint, reassurance laced with caution, and the constant undercurrent of longing that spoke to the human desire for presence and connection. She became acutely aware of how absence amplifies perception, how longing can heighten the significance of small details, and how the mind weaves intricate narratives around fragments of interaction, creating a complex tapestry of memory, hope, and anticipation. In reflecting on their evolving dynamic, she observed how physical separation necessitated emotional adaptation, the subtle shifts in expectations, and the recalibration of relational patterns to accommodate space and time. She explored the interplay between independence and intimacy, recognizing that maintaining connection across distance requires both self-sufficiency and emotional investment, a careful balance of attention and restraint. Her thoughts frequently returned to the decision to prioritize career over relocation, a choice she had justified in terms of practical considerations and long-term growth, yet now felt in its full emotional resonance. She acknowledged the duality of that choice, the preservation of personal ambition and stability alongside the tangible cost of relational proximity, shared experiences, and the intimacy of everyday life. The process of adaptation was intricate, involving both conscious and unconscious adjustments in her expectations, her communication patterns, and her perception of him and their connection. She became attuned to the subtle markers of relational strain, the delayed responses, the absence of spontaneous gestures, the quiet tension in interactions that once flowed naturally. These cues were neither catastrophic nor entirely avoidable, yet they illuminated the ways in which distance reshapes relational experience, creating both opportunities for growth and challenges to continuity. She explored her own emotional responses with precision, noting moments of longing, pangs of regret, bursts of admiration for his courage in pursuing a new environment, and the oscillation between confidence in her decision and doubt about its impact on their future. Memory and imagination intertwined, as she reconstructed past experiences with him and projected potential interactions had circumstances differed. The juxtaposition of what had been lived and what could have been intensified the emotional resonance of each moment, creating a complex, layered awareness that was both instructive and haunting. She considered the temporal dimension of separation, how time both distances and clarifies, revealing patterns, priorities, and values that may have been obscured in the immediacy of shared life. The gradual unfolding of distance became a lens through which she examined the broader contours of her identity, the nature of commitment, and the interplay between personal ambition and relational responsibility. She analyzed the psychological mechanisms at play, projection, selective recollection, and the construction of hypothetical narratives, all of which shaped both her perception of him and her understanding of the consequences of her choice. The subtle evolution of attachment under conditions of separation highlighted the resilience and fragility inherent in human connection, showing how emotional bonds can persist, transform, or fray depending on communication, shared history, and ongoing investment. She reflected on the interplay of longing and acceptance, noticing how each informed the other, and how the cultivation of patience, empathy, and insight was necessary to navigate the complex emotional terrain of long-distance relationships. The chapter became a meditation on consequence, choice, and the slow accrual of awareness, as she recognized that each interaction, each reflection, and each imagined scenario contributed to a deeper understanding of herself, him, and the delicate architecture of their connection. She explored the nuances of hope and apprehension, the oscillation between optimism for future reconciliation and acknowledgement of growing divergence, and the ways in which emotional resilience is cultivated through reflection, observation, and deliberate engagement with experience. The presence of absence revealed both vulnerability and strength, a duality that illuminated the paradoxes of relational life. That love can endure distance yet transform under its weight. That commitment can coexist with independence. And that understanding emerges through both presence and reflection. She examined the broader implications for personal growth, observing how the interplay of choice, consequence, and distance informs values, priorities, and the capacity to navigate future relational landscapes. In these reflections, she began to integrate the lessons of longing, anticipation, and emotional management into a coherent understanding of her own identity, the nature of attachment, and the intricate balancing act required to honor both self and connection across the evolving circumstances of life. The chapter concluded with a heightened awareness of how the threads of intimacy, ambition, and circumstance intertwine, shaping both perception and potential, illuminating the fragile yet resilient nature of love, and underscoring the profound human task of negotiating choice, consequence, and the ongoing pursuit of meaning in a life divided by distance yet anchored in reflection. As the weeks turned into months, her thoughts increasingly revolved around the what could have been, a haunting echo that intertwined with every routine and quiet moment. She became acutely aware of the patterns of her daily life, noting how ordinary activities were now tinged with a subtle longing, an awareness of absence that she had not fully anticipated. Each morning as she prepared for work, the sunlight filtering through familiar windows reminded her of the shared mornings that might have been spent in a new city, navigating an unfamiliar landscape together, discovering the contours of life far from the routines she had clung to. The absence of his physical presence transformed every interaction into a space of reflection. She caught herself imagining what he might be doing, how his day unfolded, and the experiences that were now entirely separate from her own. She meticulously reconstructed hypothetical scenarios, exploring in her mind the paths their lives could have taken if she had agreed to move, envisioning the shared mornings, the discoveries, the challenges, and even the minor disagreements that could have deepened their intimacy. Each scenario was vivid and detailed, painted in the colors of both excitement and trepidation, and yet always carrying the bittersweet weight of impossibility. She reflected on her decision with a growing awareness of complexity, acknowledging that her choice to prioritize her career had been reasoned and intentional, but also recognizing that reasoning cannot always shield one from emotional consequences. The act of prioritizing ambition over relational proximity was not devoid of wisdom. Yet it carried costs that only became fully apparent in the absence of shared life and daily presence. She observed the subtle ways in which distance reshaped their connection. Delayed messages, less frequent calls, and the diminishing immediacy of intimacy that had once been effortless. These shifts were not dramatic, yet they were profoundly felt, accumulating into a quiet but persistent awareness of relational divergence. The juxtaposition of what was and what might have been created a layered emotional experience, blending pride, regret, longing, and reflection into a constant internal dialogue. She examined the interplay between autonomy and intimacy, recognizing that the pursuit of personal ambition is inherently entwined with relational consequences, and that true understanding arises from the careful negotiation of priorities, values, and desires. In her contemplations, she recognized the subtle erosion of connection that physical separation can precipitate, and how emotional proximity requires continuous attention, effort, and mutual investment, particularly when everyday life is no longer shared. Memory became a lens through which she interpreted absence. Each recollection of shared experiences, quiet evenings, spontaneous laughter, the comfort of proximity, gaining new weight in the context of what had been deferred. Her mind alternated between concrete recollection and imaginative projection, the boundaries between past, present, and potential life blending in a tapestry of reflection and longing. She analyzed the psychological mechanisms at play. Selective memory highlighted moments of connection, while imagination expanded upon the opportunities now lost, producing a rich, complex narrative of relational and personal evolution. The realization that distance amplifies both longing and insight emerged, as she noted how absence sharpened awareness of values, priorities, and emotional needs, forcing a reckoning with the interplay between desire and pragmatism, intimacy and independence. She reflected on the nature of regret, distinguishing it from self-reproach, and recognized that the pangs of longing were a natural byproduct of choice, a signal of the depth of attachment, and a catalyst for introspection and growth. Each reflection deepened her understanding of relational dynamics, illustrating how timing, context, and individual priorities intersect to shape the trajectory of love and partnership. She examined the subtle psychological tension between hope and acceptance, between imagining reconciliation and acknowledging divergence, understanding that these processes are vital to navigating long-term connection across distance. Her emotional landscape became increasingly sophisticated, capable of holding multiple, sometimes contradictory, truths. The pride in her professional accomplishments alongside the ache for shared experience. The respect for his pursuit of opportunity alongside the sorrow of absence. And the oscillation between resilience and vulnerability that marked her internal life. She explored the ethical and emotional dimensions of relational choice, noting how love, ambition, and circumstance interact, and how understanding these interactions requires both self-awareness and empathy for the other. The chapter unfolded as a meditation on the subtle consequences of prioritization, showing how decisions ripple outward to influence identity, perception, and relational potential. She recognized that intimacy can endure distance yet is invariably transformed by it. That personal growth often occurs in tension with relational compromise. And that the negotiation between self-fulfillment and shared experience is continuous and dynamic. The interplay between lived experience and imagined potential illuminated the nuanced architecture of human emotion, how longing, reflection, and projection shape understanding, and how the mind constructs meaning from both presence and absence. She contemplated the lessons embedded in separation, including the cultivation of patience, resilience, perspective, and the appreciation of the intricate balance between individual aspiration and relational connection. Memory, imagination, and reflection coalesced to create a heightened sense of awareness, allowing her to observe both her own emotional patterns and the subtle evolution of connection. Across distance, she became attuned to the ways in which relational bonds transform when physical proximity is altered, and how adaptation, intentionality, and empathy are required to sustain connection. The process revealed the interplay of temporal, spatial, and emotional dimensions in shaping the experience of love, choice, and consequence, highlighting the importance of conscious engagement with both self and other. In synthesizing these reflections, she cultivated a nuanced understanding of the complexity of human choice, the enduring impact of decisions on identity and relationships, and the delicate, ongoing negotiation necessary to balance ambition, intimacy, and the pursuit of a fulfilling life. The chapter closed with the recognition that the past, though unchangeable, continues to inform perception, priorities, and emotional awareness, creating a foundation for navigating the evolving landscape of connection, self-discovery, and relational understanding. As time passed, her reflections deepened, moving beyond immediate emotions and into a more nuanced understanding of both herself and the trajectory of their relationship. She became increasingly aware of the cumulative weight of distance, not only in physical terms but in the subtle transformations of intimacy, expectation, and perception that accompanied living separate lives. Each interaction, whether a brief message, a delayed reply, or an absent call, carried with it layers of meaning that she could no longer interpret solely through the lens of familiarity. She had to navigate a new relational grammar, one shaped by absence, longing, and the deliberate allocation of attention. In these moments, she confronted the complexity of choice, recognizing that prioritizing her career had been both necessary and consequential, that the life she had preserved for herself was intertwined inexorably with the life she had deferred with him. The realization was not a sudden epiphany but a gradual layering of awareness. Each observation of their evolving dynamic revealing subtle truths about autonomy, attachment, and relational negotiation. She began to map the emotional architecture of her experience, identifying patterns of longing, anticipation, pride, and regret, and she understood that these threads were interdependent, forming a tapestry that both constrained and illuminated her understanding of connection. The oscillation between satisfaction in personal achievement and sorrow for relational compromise became a persistent theme, highlighting the inherent tension in balancing ambition with intimacy, self-fulfillment with shared growth. She considered the mechanisms of adaptation that she and he employed, noticing how distance demanded deliberate effort to maintain connection, and how emotional proximity, though fragile, could endure through intentional communication, empathy, and the shared commitment to understanding the other's evolving circumstances. Memory and imagination became central to her navigation of relational space. She reconstructed shared moments with heightened awareness, imbuing ordinary interactions with new significance, while simultaneously projecting alternative realities where she had chosen differently. Each imagined scenario revealed both the richness and the fragility of relational potential, underscoring the role of choice in shaping not only immediate circumstances but the long-term arc of intimacy and shared life. She explored the ethical dimensions of her decision, reflecting on the responsibilities inherent in prioritizing personal goals over relational proximity, and considering how love, ambition, and circumstance intersect in ways that demand both courage and introspection. The process illuminated the subtle interdependence of autonomy and relational investment, demonstrating that personal growth and connection are not mutually exclusive, but require continual negotiation, self-awareness, and the willingness to accept consequences that may be emotionally taxing. She observed the ways in which absence accentuated both longing and clarity, providing a lens through which she could discern the qualities of their bond, the dimensions of her own desire, and the patterns of expectation and sacrifice that informed her choices. The oscillation between hope and acceptance was persistent, revealing the duality inherent in long-distance relational experience, the potential for growth and enrichment alongside the inevitable recognition of limitations and losses. She examined the interplay of resilience and vulnerability, understanding that the endurance of relational bonds across distance requires both emotional fortitude and sensitivity, and that the cultivation of perspective is essential to sustaining meaningful connection in the face of temporal and spatial separation. Her reflections extended to the psychological mechanisms underpinning attachment and regret, considering how memory, projection, and selective recollection interact to shape perception, emotion, and understanding. She recognized that regret was not merely a reflection of failure but an acknowledgement of the inherent costs of choice, a signal of the depth of relational investment and the awareness of alternative paths foregone. In tracing these currents, she developed a sophisticated awareness of relational dynamics, noting how timing, opportunity, and personal priorities intersect to influence both the course of connection and the evolution of self. She became attuned to the delicate interplay of desire, expectation, and autonomy, appreciating that love is both resilient and vulnerable, that commitment is both a choice and a practice, and that the ongoing negotiation of space, attention, and intention shapes the texture of relational life. Each day offered the opportunity for observation, reflection, and incremental adaptation, a slow calibration of emotional engagement that required awareness, patience, and insight. She noted how her own internal landscape was being reshaped by distance. The cultivation of empathy, the refinement of perspective, and the heightened understanding of the trade-offs inherent in prioritizing one domain of life over another. Memory, projection, and reflection merged to provide both instruction and solace, revealing the ways in which emotional growth is cultivated through careful attention to consequence, perspective, and self-awareness. She examined the subtle evolution of his responses, noting how the patterns of communication, initiative, and engagement had shifted in response to separation, and how these shifts provided insight into the fragility, resilience, and adaptability of attachment. In exploring her own reactions, she identified the tensions between longing and acceptance, pride and regret, autonomy and connection, understanding that these dynamics are not easily resolved but must be navigated with conscious attention and care. The chapter unfolded as an extended meditation on the consequences of choice, illustrating how decisions echo across time and space, shaping emotional experience, relational trajectory, and the ongoing development of self. She considered the implications for future relational engagement, recognizing that insight gleaned from reflection and distance can inform both present and subsequent choices, fostering greater awareness, intentionality, and empathy. Through these reflections, she began to construct a framework for understanding the interplay of ambition, intimacy, and consequence, appreciating that life's richness arises from the balance of these elements and the capacity to integrate lessons from experience into ongoing personal and relational evolution. The passage of time provided both distance and clarity, allowing her to observe the subtle patterns of desire, choice, and consequence that shape the human experience, and to cultivate a nuanced understanding of how to navigate the delicate equilibrium between self-fulfillment and shared connection, autonomy and intimacy, ambition and relational investment. In the quiet of reflection, she recognized that growth is inseparable from choice, that resilience is nurtured through engagement with consequence, and that understanding the complexity of human relational dynamics provides the foundation for a life that integrates both ambition and connection with insight, maturity, and emotional depth. As the months unfolded, she began to recognize the cumulative effect of distance not only on her relationship but on her own self-understanding and the way she approached life. The physical separation had forced a profound internal reckoning, compelling her to examine the consequences of her choices with clarity and nuance. Every morning, as she moved through familiar routines, the absence of his presence was a tangible reminder of the path not taken, a quiet echo of the intimacy and shared life she had deferred for the sake of career and personal ambition. She reflected on the complex interplay of independence and attachment, understanding that prioritizing her professional growth had been both rational and necessary, yet inevitably intertwined with emotional cost. The realization that love and life are rarely simple illuminated her internal dialogue, highlighting the delicate balance between pursuing personal fulfillment and maintaining connection with those who matter most. In her contemplation, she traced the intricate consequences of her decision, recognizing that each choice creates ripples that extend far beyond the immediate moment, influencing perception, emotion, and relational dynamics across time. She examined the subtle shifts in communication and connection, noting the changes in tone, timing, and frequency that accompany distance, and the ways in which these adjustments reveal both resilience and fragility within the fabric of intimacy. Memory became a lens through which she interpreted absence. Recollections of shared mornings, quiet conversations, and unremarkable yet intimate routines were infused with new meaning, their significance amplified by the knowledge of what had been deferred. Her imagination constructed parallel narratives, painting detailed scenarios in which she had chosen differently, exploring the texture of daily life, the shared adventures, and even the conflicts that would have inevitably arisen. These projections were vivid and emotionally charged, providing insight into both her desires and the costs associated with each potential path. She considered the ethical and emotional dimensions of her choice, reflecting on responsibility, autonomy, and the impact of personal ambition on relational bonds. She recognized that love requires flexibility and courage, that sustaining intimacy across distance demands intentionality, and that understanding the consequences of decisions is essential to both personal growth and relational health. The oscillation between pride in her achievements and longing for shared experience became a constant companion, illuminating the dual nature of choice and consequence, and reinforcing the complexity of human emotional landscapes. She observed the subtle evolution of both her own emotional responses and his, noting how the interplay of distance, opportunity, and personal growth reshaped expectations, perceptions, and behaviors. In doing so, she cultivated a deep appreciation for the resilience of connection, even when challenged by separation and competing priorities, and for the transformative power of introspection in understanding both self and other. The months of reflection revealed patterns in her own thoughts and feelings. Moments of regret intertwined with satisfaction, longing with acceptance, vulnerability with strength, and anticipation with measured patience. She explored the ways in which memory, imagination, and reflection shape perception, understanding that the mind's reconstruction of past events and projection of alternative futures informs present experience and future decision-making. She noted that the passage of time, while emphasizing absence, also afforded clarity, providing the space to integrate lessons learned, recalibrate expectations, and approach both personal ambition and relational commitment with heightened insight. Her reflections extended beyond the immediate relationship, encompassing broader understanding of choice, consequence, and the negotiation of competing priorities in all aspects of life. She recognized that the cultivation of self-awareness, empathy, and resilience is an ongoing process, one that is nurtured through reflection on both accomplishments and regrets, and through conscious engagement with the interplay of autonomy and attachment. She considered the long-term implications of her decisions, understanding that each path chosen, or deferred, shapes identity, perspective, and capacity for intimacy, and that embracing this complexity is essential for meaningful growth. The exercise of envisioning alternative lives revealed not only the richness of potential experiences but also the responsibility inherent in choice, the way in which freedom and consequence are intertwined, and the necessity of living with awareness and intentionality. She integrated these insights into a more nuanced understanding of both herself and her relational capacities, recognizing that growth emerges from the careful balancing of desire, duty, ambition, and love. Reflection revealed that acceptance of the path chosen does not diminish longing, but instead allows for reconciliation, understanding, and a measured embrace of reality. She explored the delicate equilibrium between regret and hope, learning that awareness of what might have been can coexist with appreciation for the present and preparation for the future. Memory, reflection, and imagination became tools for cultivating insight, resilience, and empathy, enabling her to navigate the evolving terrain of human connection with grace and intentionality. She understood that relationships are shaped not only by choice but by circumstance, timing, and the ongoing negotiation between individual and shared needs. This awareness fostered a capacity to honor both personal ambition and relational potential, recognizing that meaningful connection requires both commitment and flexibility, presence and patience. The distance that had initially seemed like a void now became a space for profound self-exploration, emotional calibration, and the cultivation of insight. She acknowledged the interplay of longing and learning, autonomy and attachment, achievement and connection, understanding that these forces are neither mutually exclusive nor easily reconciled, but that their navigation is central to both personal and relational growth. In contemplating the future, she recognized that clarity emerges not from the elimination of uncertainty but from engagement with complexity, reflection on choice, and the integration of experience into a coherent sense of self. The chapter concluded with the understanding that life's richness lies in the interplay between ambition, connection, and consequence, that growth is inseparable from choice, and that the lessons of distance, reflection, and intentionality equip her to approach both present and future relationships with empathy, awareness, and emotional depth, embracing the balance between personal fulfillment and the enduring potential for meaningful human connection.
Thanks for watching. It means a lot. Share the video, and I'll see you soon.